Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
Let me give you a scenario. Your dental practice has a daily production goal of $5,000. It's Monday morning. You start the day off with your morning huddle and find out that there's only $3,000 on the schedule. So your team looks at the schedule and suggests a few scenarios which would make up this $2,000 difference in order to meet your goal. For example, they may call Mr. Smith to come in today versus tomorrow to start those two crowns. Or maybe you could talk with Mrs. Jones, who's seeing the hygienist for a cleaning, about those 3 inlays you diagnosed last time she was there, and see if you can't start them today. You just so happen to have some open time around the same time as her hygiene appointment. So after having discussed a few possible scenarios that could save the day and satisfied that you have a plan, you and your team jump into today's schedule and get to work. At the end of the day, or at the morning huddle on Tuesday, the following day, you ask how the office ended up for Monday. And you find out that nothing really changed. You produced the $3,000 that was originally on the schedule and nothing more. Disappointed, but not knowing what else to do, you begin the morning huddle for Tuesday and go through the same motions. You still have that same daily $5,000 production goal. Maybe it's already scheduled or maybe it's not. You and the team brainstorm about how to fix it, and so the day goes, and you may or may not hit your goal, just like what happened the day before. Does any of this sound familiar? Well, if you're anything like the hundreds of new clients we onboard every year, you're either not meeting your daily goals regularly, not sure about what to do when you don't, or worse, you don't regularly set goals in the first place, meaning daily, monthly, weekly, quarterly, however you lay them out. And look, if you're not setting goals for things like production, collections, or new patients, maybe it's time to start. You don't make a goal you don't set. But if you are setting goals for your practice and you're not making them routinely, like there's no consistency, then this episode of Dental Business RX is for you. We're going to identify the 6 reasons you might not be meeting your daily goals, and even more importantly, what to do about it. My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host, and I think we should start just by jumping right in with the first reason you may not be meeting your goals. So reason number 1, you may have heard iterations of before if you've been a regular listener. But what it is no defined areas of responsibility in the practice. And again, if you've heard this before, why would I say this more than once? I say this because this is important and not enough people do it, okay? If you're a traditional dental practice, you have, 1 or more people at the front. And what do we call these people? Let's say you have 3 people at the front. We call them front desk people. That's really not a job description. If you have a hygienist, is it a or an? Has an H. But anyway, let's say you have a hygienist. That's a job description. They're the dental hygienist. If you have a front desk person, they're named after furniture. They don't really have a job description. They're just, working at the front desk. So the problem with having 3 people at the front desk and no clear division of responsibility is when something goes wrong, who do you talk to? You have 3 people. There's a 3-hour opening. You go talk to them and go, what's happening here? Everybody sort of just shakes their head and, they want to do something about it. They might be very willing, but who is ultimately accountable for that? It's almost as if you had a baseball team and you put everybody out on the field and nobody had a particular position. They're all just sort of out there. That wouldn't work. Everybody has to have a defined area of responsibility. Now, I've heard the counter argument, because there's lots of different ways and ideas about how to organize things, which is, everybody should know how to do everything just in case you lose somebody or someone's out sick or whatever. And that idea of cross-training, I'm fine with that. Cross-training people so that, the financial coordinator or the treatment coordinator has to answer the phone in case the receptionist isn't there. That's fine. I'm all down with that. But it's ultimately the receptionist's responsibility. So you have to have a clear division of labor. As far as how that might look, again, let's say you have 3 people at the front. You might have one person who's the receptionist, one person who's the schedule coordinator, and the other who's the financial coordinator. One of them may also be the office manager. Let's say the office manager is also the financial coordinator, and then you have a scheduler and a receptionist. Or you have a scheduler / receptionist, just because, why do I say these things differently? Normally people think of a scheduler and a receptionist as the same person. This is sort of that same thing as naming them a front desk person. Technically, a receptionist should be, and you could see how this would work if the office got busy. The receptionist would be the person answering the phone, routing communication, making sure communication is going in and out of the practice, receiving patients, making sure patients get to the back on time, taking care of patients who are in your reception area. That would be the reception job. Now, in a smaller office, that's not a full-time job. In a large office that's getting hundreds of phone calls a day and maybe you're seeing 20, 40, 50, 60 patients a day, that probably is a full-time job. Scheduling is a total different thing. The schedule coordinator is responsible for the scheduling book. They're responsible for overall office production. So you could see how that's a little different than the person answering the phone. Now, could that be the same person in a smaller practice? Yes, but as the practice grows, those jobs would have to split at some point, or the person doing the schedule would be completely overwhelmed because they're constantly answering the phone and they have no time to get on the phone to fill a last-minute opening. You see? So as you grow, these things split. I mean, conversely, let's say you have somebody in charge of your schedule, and let's say it's a practice where you have one doctor, two hygienists, and you have somebody just tracking with the schedule. Then you add an associate and another hygienist. And eventually you've got 3 associates and 5 or 6 hygienists. Well, most likely one person isn't going to effectively be able to keep all of those providers completely busy. So then you might have somebody that works for the scheduler at that point. It might be a hygiene coordinator who handles the hygiene schedule, reports to the scheduler, but the scheduler is still responsible for the overall office production. You see? So you have to have clear divisions of responsibility. Okay, that's a simple explanation for it, but that would be the basic idea. And each of these jobs would have an expected outcome. If I had a scheduler, what would I expect from the scheduler? I would want my schedule done correctly, especially if I've divvied up certain times where certain things are supposed to happen. I might do larger procedures, what we like to call primary procedures, higher dollar value procedures in the morning. I might like to do my deliveries in the afternoon. You see, I might want to have consults at certain times. These would be an organization to my scheduler. So I would want my scheduler to make sure my schedule is A, scheduled that way, B, that it's scheduled efficiently, C, that it's scheduled productively. And how would I measure this outcome? I would have a statistic, and that statistic for a scheduler would probably be production. Same thing with a financial coordinator. What would you expect if you had a financial coordinator? Well, you would expect that you wouldn't have a ton of uncollected accounts receivable. You would expect good financial arrangements in accordance with office policy. You see, these are all expected outcomes. So I have a division of labor with an expected outcome, which has a statistic that belongs to that person. They have to own it. So if I have a schedule coordinator whose statistic is production, it's not like they're just giving me the production number if I'm the manager or the doctor, like, oh, we produced 5,000 yesterday, as if there's some spectator. Like, hey, yeah, I saw the number on the day sheet. Here it is. They have nothing to do with it. They have everything to do with it because they're the one who's creating that statistic. So if it's up, that's great. If it's down, that's not great. And a funny thing is, once you start keeping statistics, one thing you'll note, and this to me is more of a testament to, people are actually pretty cool, is if the stat's up, you're going to know about it, which I think is great. If the stat's down, people have a hard time, owning up to things that are negative. This is just, I think, human nature. So you'll see if stats up, the person can see how they contributed to that. Maybe they can or can't. But if the stats down, there's lots of other factors, right? It was there was a storm, or these patients said they were coming and they didn't show up, or whatever it might be. But they have to own the good and the bad. So if you have somebody who isn't creating their expected outcome, then what are the solutions for that? It might be training. It might be, working with the person, apprenticing them, especially if you're a manager and you're turning over that job to somebody. But if it's a continuous long-term series of non-performance, then you might want to start looking at replacing that person. And that's sort of the guide, right? It's not just based off of opinion or your thoughts for the day. It's based off of hard numbers. Are they performing or aren't they? So assuming you have people who are responsible, because we're going over these 6 reasons, right? These 6 problems that keep you from meeting your goals. Assuming you have someone who's responsible, what is the next item that will keep you from meeting your goals? Well, what that is irregular coordination. Could be irregular or no coordination. What is coordination? It's organizing people so that they work together as a group harmoniously. Now, how would you normally coordinate in an office? Because I'm over here as the financial coordinator, and the dental assistant's in the back, and the schedule coordinator, even though they're maybe sitting next to me as the financial coordinator, we're not necessarily talking on a regular basis to go over what I'm doing and what they're doing. Well, that's why you have meetings. This is what you're supposed to be using your morning huddle for, so that we're looking at the day as a group, each with our own individual jobs and outcomes that we're supposed to create, and then looking at the different, products or things that other people in the office are supposed to get done and seeing and being coordinated about it. Like, for example, if I'm the schedule coordinator, I find out during the meeting from the financial coordinator that this patient coming in has a large balance that's coming in on recall. And as the scheduler, I make sure when I go to schedule that person before they leave that they saw the financial coordinator to take care of their balance. Just little things like this. There's of course, a lot more to it than that, but that's the basic idea. We're all on the same page and we're all approaching the day coordinated so that we're working harmoniously and not letting things just slide or fall between the cracks. And to that end, I've offered this before as a download, but, we don't call it here at MGE a morning huddle. We call it a morning production meeting. I'll give you a copy of, we have a handout that you can read as to how to hold one of these morning production meetings. I'll put it on the episode webpage if you want to download it. And this gives you sort of a guide as to how this morning meeting should run to enhance coordination to its fullest. So now, if you have a plan, you have people responsible, and everybody knows who's doing what, what's the next reason you might not be meeting your goals? Let's say you have those first two things in. Would be no targets assigned. Let's go back to that earlier example, how I started the episode. So you've had your morning meeting, your morning huddle, your morning production meeting, whatever you'd like to call it. The team has worked out various ideas on how to salvage this $3,000 day and turn it into a $5,000 day. You're supposed to go over and talk to Mrs. Jones about the 3 inlays you've already diagnosed, right? So that may or may not work. She may say yes, she may say no, she may say yes, and she can't do them today, in which case, great, you do them tomorrow or the next day. But ultimately, who's responsible for that target? Target meaning something that has to get done. So you have a couple people on the hook for this. A hygienist might have to do some education with this patient. Hey, Mrs. Jones, we never got those inlays done. I want to show you what's going on here. They're helping to educate the patient. The assistant has to be aware that the doctor has to pop in and go talk to Mrs. Jones. Maybe Mrs. Jones isn't due for an exam for that recall appointment. Who knows? But then the doctor would make a special trip into the room. And then the treatment coordinator has to be aware that Mrs. Jones might be coming to them to talk to them about financial arrangements. So if you dissect it, hygienist, doc, assistant, treatment coordinator, all on the same page, making sure that target happens. Or what about moving that patient from tomorrow? That was one of the ideas to fill that, to fill an opening to be able to make your target. Well, who's responsible for that? You would have a schedule coordinator. But if you have your front desk people, who's given that target? The front desk. And if everybody is responsible for everything, who's responsible? No one's responsible for anything. We all know this, okay? So what happens is you come up with ideas, you're setting targets up, things to get done that might fix the day, and no one is assigned as responsible to actually get those things done. That's where it tends to go wrong. So you have people whose job it is, you get together and you have a meeting and you figure out this is how we're going to solve today's lack of production or tomorrow's lack of production, whatever it is that you're trying to solve. And nobody is assigned, you even come up with ideas, steps, action steps, maybe is a good way of saying it, but nobody is assigned to be ultimately accountable for that action step. So this is what I mean by no targets assigned. Assigned meaning they own that step. They're responsible for executing it. So ideally, you would assign those steps to whoever is responsible for that type of activity in the practice. So if it's a scheduling target, I would give it to the scheduler. If it's a financial target, I'd give it to the financial coordinator. Or if it's a sales target, I'd give it to the treatment coordinator. That would be the ideal. You're giving it to the person whose job it belongs to. So let's say we have people who are responsible. We've done that. We're regularly getting together and meeting. We're doing it consistently. That's another thing. And I know I'm kind of jumping back a step here to this idea of irregular or no coordination. Meetings have to be held routinely. You have to have your team so used to the meeting that they find it odd when you don't have one. Like maybe there's a reason to not have a meeting this morning. There was this ice storm and nobody's going to be at work till 10. So you cancel your morning production meeting or morning huddle. You almost want people feeling weird that you're not having one as opposed to having it irregularly. So you have to constantly do it to the point where it becomes second nature. But let's say you have all these three things in. People, you're having regular meetings and you've assigned targets. What's the next reason that you might not meet that daily, weekly, or monthly goal? Which, as an aside, sorry, I know I'm kind of all over the place here. I wouldn't just set a daily goal. I would have a daily goal that contributes to a monthly goal, maybe even a quarterly goal, maybe be looking a little further out. And because then you have to attach it to something. So if I go back to that example I started off with, this practice did 3,000 that day and they have a $5,000 a day goal. Well, if we're working 17 days that month, that means that we have an $85,000 goal for this month. Maybe that includes hygiene, maybe it doesn't. So it might even be higher than 85,000. So if we only do 3,000 today, we're behind goal. We have to make it up somewhere. And obviously we want to start making it up earlier than later. I don't want to be, 2 days before the end of the month and be at $40,000 and completely out of hope, you see? So I would attach it to more than just daily if you want to make a bigger impact on what it is that you're trying to do. Monthly would be good, maybe even quarterly. Okay, and you can break it down. All right, so what's this fourth reason? You have your people, they have jobs, you're having meetings, and you've assigned targets. Is no one is driving, pushing, or handling those targets. No one is actually making sure that whatever was assigned at the morning meeting actually got done. You might go, well, Jeff, why would I need somebody to make sure things get done? I have a really nice and good staff and they're very competent. I don't care how competent your team is. If there's no one being the executive and making sure that stuff is actually getting done, some things are not going to happen. What if something goes wrong? What if someone doesn't do what they're supposed to do? What if you had 3 ideas to salvage the day and they all go south first thing in the morning? You need to come up with more ideas. What if your treatment coordinator is seeing a patient and then the next patient's waiting for the treatment coordinator and the treatment coordinator can't get out of the room? This patient's taking longer than expected to wrap up their financial arrangements. Things back up. Things go wrong. The schedule ends up behind. Who's making sure this is all getting ironed out? Well, ultimately, that would be the office manager. Now, the office manager might also have another job in the practice in a smaller office. That's fine. Eventually, the office, if they're doing their job, will grow and they'll be able to bring in somebody to take that job from them. So what is the office manager doing throughout the day? In addition to whatever other parts of their job that they have to do that day, the office manager would be making sure that whatever targets or action items were established in the morning meeting actually get done throughout the day. You might even have action items that you set up for the week. The office manager is making sure that all of those are getting done in turn. And when they're not getting done, they're actually sorting it out so that the objective is still achieved. So if we came up with 3 ideas to salvage the day and they're not working out, the office manager is looking for other ways to salvage the day. Do you see? They're pushing it. They're making sure that it's getting handled. They're making sure that the treatment coordinator isn't backed up. Maybe they're grabbing the next patient themselves. Maybe someone left the office because they weren't feeling well. The office manager makes sure that their targets get done that day. They make things work throughout the day to make sure that your targets are actually met. So maybe you do or don't have an office manager. I did an episode on office managers early on. I think it was, that must have been in the first 20 or 30 episodes that I did. I wish I had the number in front of me. But there's a lot of confusion as to what an office manager is and what it is they are supposed to do. I discussed that in that episode. But the office manager is ultimately the senior executive running the practice. They're not the front desk manager. I mean, they are, but that's just one of their duties. They're responsible for overall practice productivity because if the owner doctor is chairside, they cannot effectively manage the practice. How are you going to manage the practice while you're doing a root canal? That's just not going to happen. You're focused on a space that's 1 by 1 inch, square. For an hour. You need someone who's actively running the practice throughout the day and making sure that things are actually happening. So let's assume we've got that. We've got our office manager. We have our people. We have specific jobs. We have our meeting. We've assigned targets to different people, action items. We have an office manager. Well, then what else would prevent us from meeting our goals on a regular basis? What it would be no accountability or consequences. Let's say the scheduler was supposed to call 5 different patients to move things around to salvage the day. Well, he or she just didn't do that. Well, what happens? Nothing. Maybe they get a little bit of a stern talking to. I mean, they could deal with that. Not a big deal. Or maybe they're just not performing. The schedule has tons of openings. It's very empty. Your hygiene schedule is emptying out. You can't figure out why. You don't have the patients in there that actually need treatment to be able to keep your office productive. And I'm just grabbing scheduling as an example. This could happen on any position in the office. Well, if there's no accountability or consequences for that, well, then that behavior is just going to continue. And even worse, if that continues long term, it will start to affect your other team members. If I'm in a situation where, I'm the financial coordinator and I see the receptionist is continuously late and nothing happens to them, well, That kind of gives me license to be late, doesn't it? Doesn't mean I'll do it, but I might, and I could be a perfectly good personnel. Then the schedule coordinator sees that the receptionist and I'm the financial coordinator are late on a routine basis, so they decide to do the same thing. Or maybe they decide it's okay to act sulky and disrespectful to the office manager or doctor because the assistant does it. Do you see, you get this kind of, I jokingly call it a staph infection, but it starts to spread within the practice. If there's no consequences for non-performance, for not doing what they're supposed to do, then that's a problem. There has to be, it might be, who knows? If it's the scheduler as an example, maybe they're just not doing their job. Maybe it's a training issue. Maybe it's a discipline issue. Or maybe it's a replacement issue. You see? There has to be something that happens if I don't do my job. And if there isn't, then you're going to have a non-productive scene. Which brings us to this reason number 6 that you might not be meeting your goals, which is, this happens to do with you, the doctor. This has to do with you. Do you care or even want it? Or have you just become apathetic about it? Maybe you've gone through enough days where that just haven't met your expectations, and maybe you've set this goal that you rarely achieve it, that you get the idea that it just cannot be done. Let me give you an example. And this maybe isn't a daily goal thing, but this is a policy implementation point. Let's say you decide, I only want to do productive procedures in the morning. That's when I'm going to do my high dollar procedures, what we call primary procedures, because that's when I'm in the best situation in order to be able to do it. The office isn't as busy yet. The afternoons get crazy. So you make that decision. And it's completely reasonable in your mind for patients to come in the morning. So you make that your office policy. And your scheduler can't get anyone to come in the morning. Your schedule's now empty. So you ask your scheduler, why are there no patients in my primary procedure slots? And he or she says, well, people just can't come in the morning because they're working. So you have one or two choices at that point. Number one, you would evaluate, did what you asked the scheduler to do, or was what you asked the scheduler to do rather reasonable? Was it a doable thing? You know, I would never ask somebody to do something that I myself could not conceive of doing. I think that would be weird, right? So, yeah, I could conceive of scheduling people to come in the morning. I go to doctor's appointments in the morning. Why can't my patients? So that's the first thing you would want to do to evaluate this. Is it reasonable what I'm asking them to do? If it is, and they're just not doing it, the problem is not your policy. The problem is the person. I'll say that again. The problem is not the policy. The problem is the person. Now, let's say you set a policy that's just completely unreasonable and unworkable. You want your patients to pay in advance for their procedures 2 weeks before their appointment, including cleaning. So you have your staff calling patients, you're coming in for a recall visit in 2 weeks. We would like you to pay. Patients might go, what is this? No other dentist does this. That might cause problems. Well, it's probably just not a good policy. You know, it's maybe not the best example, but just to give you an idea. If what you're asking a person to do is reasonable and it's not being done, it's not the policy, it's the person. So that's the first point I would evaluate. But most people don't do this. What they do instead is go, oh, well, we can't get patients in the morning. I guess it's just not something that can be done. And you become apathetic about it. In other words, why bother trying? We'll just schedule all my primary procedures in the evening. This is what happens as an example with PPOs. You go, well, patients just want their PPOs. Patients don't want to go to a doctor who's out of network. You've bought that idea, so therefore you won't drop PPOs and you'll work for 50% of what you should be working for. So you as the owner doctor have to set an example and be inspirational to the rest of the team. If you're apathetic about getting things done and you don't have that desire in order to get things done, that is going to exude to the rest of your group. What kind of example are you setting for your staff? What kind of example are you setting for your office manager? Your office manager is your partner in expansion. And this is something that you just can't allow to stand. It's something that you need to handle. How do you ultimately handle it? I mean, my suggestion would be, get trained as an executive. Because again, just like the doctor has a specific outcome, your doctor job that you have has a specific expected outcome, a healthy patient. You have a sales job as the doctor. If you're the owner doctor, you're selling treatment. What's the outcome you expect of a salesperson? Would be a close, right? Well, you're also an owner, which means you're an executive, whether you like it or not. Well, an executive has an expected outcome, which is an expanding, profitable organization. If you're not getting that, then the problem is your executive skills. And it's not that you're deficient as an executive. Maybe you just never did any training for it. So that would be my suggested handling for that, because you can't walk around apathetic when you're trying to get people to do things or believe that it can't be done in the first place. Anyway, so those are the 6 main reasons that I see, especially with newer clients, where they would not be achieving their goals. And look, you've spent a lot of time learning how to become a doctor. I've said this before. Make it worth it. You know, your careers have an expiration date on them. Love your career. And in order to be able to do that, maybe there are some things that you have to know or learn so that it works out the way that you want it to. Anyway, I hope this helps. If you have any questions about MGE or want to know more or want any help, you can find us online at mgeonline.com or call us at 800-640-1140. I have that download for the morning production meeting on the episode webpage. You can go ahead and download that if you like. And I'll see you at the next episode. Have a great week.